Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Beauty History. I am your host, Allison Chase. Beauty History is where we take a deep dive into the life, history, and legacy of someone in the fashion or beauty world. There is a new episode the first Friday of every month. However, for the month of June, there will be a little exception. Now, for today's subject, we will be taking a deep dive into the history and legacy of Louis Vuitton. But before we go any further, let's take a second to grab our iced coffee or a hot coffee. Let's take a sip and let's get started. Louis Vuitton, or Louis Vuitton if you're nasty, is one of the oldest luxury houses in the world, and the namesake, the actual man, Louis Vuitton, was born August 4th, 1821, and he was born in Angers, France, in France. This is a very small village that it's close to the border with Switzerland, and it was a village. I'm not talking about a city, just like a very, very small town. And Louis came from a long line of working class people. His father was a farmer, his mother was a hat maker, and because his father was a farmer, it was expected that he would also become a farmer. He would take up the family trade, he would be, I don't know all the terms, but plowing the field, planting the seeds, taking care of livestock, etc. However, this was not necessarily the life that Louis wanted for himself. Now, unfortunately for Louis, when he was about 10 years old, his mother passed away and his father quickly remarried, and Louis did not get along with his stepmother at all. And even more unfortunate for Louis is not long after his father's remarriage, his father also passed away. So by the age of 13, he had lost both of his parents, and he was stuck in a way with his stepmother, who he did not get along with at all, like absolutely like water and oil. And things got so bad that at the age of 13, Louis ran away from home. But he didn't just run away from home, he left the family home for good and never returned at the age of 13. It's quite dramatic. He actually made the voyage from Angers to Paris by foot. I mean, this was the 1830s by this point, but there was no Uber, there was no taxi. He left his family home with the clothing on his back. He was poor, he was homeless. So the route from Angers to Paris is about 470 kilometers. That's a lot of walking, that's a lot of steps. I calculated it. If he walked 7 kilometers by foot every day, it would have taken him 68 days straight. However, you need breaks, you need little pauses every now and then. And again, he left with the clothing on his back, so he didn't have any money for things like food or shelter. So he had to stop so that he could take odd jobs and maybe beg, borrow and steal, do something so that he could, feed himself and maybe not sleep out in a field every night. According to most records, it took Louis about 2 years to get to Paris by foot. Like, this is walking every day. I mean, maybe he got a horse every now and then. Maybe he could hitchhike on the back of a caravan every now and then, but it was mostly done by foot. When he arrived in Paris, it was around the time of the Industrial Revolution, which meant that the modes of transportations were changing for people. People were starting to take a little bit longer voyages. Not for him, not for someone in his class, to be honest. It would have been for the rich people, but it just meant that rich people could now travel for longer, and this meant that they would be taking more stuff with them as they traveled longer. And once Louis got to Paris, he started working or apprenticing under Monsieur Maréchal, who was a very famous trunk maker at the time, because like I said, rich people needed massive trunks to pack up all of their goods, like not just clothing, but you know, fancy decorative baubles, all those things you need between your country palace and your city palace. You need to bring those things back and forth sometimes. So Monsieur Maréchal was really well renowned, I guess, for being an excellent craftsman as a trunk maker and packer. So Louis apprenticed under him and worked with him for several years. Oftentimes when I do research for beauty history, because of the time period, I don't always have copious amounts of information. Basically, Louis gets to Paris, works with Monsieur Maréchal, and then becomes an overnight success. An overnight success after 10 years of working. You know what I mean? Like, it was not an overnight success. He worked very hard for a very long time and eventually built up his own craftsmanship where his work was impeccable, and also his reputation. And Louis, as a young man, had this incredible reputation for just being a skilled trunk maker. Like, his trunks were just so sturdy and durable and wonderful. And it actually got him the praise of an empress at the time. This was Empress Eugénie de Montijo. And she actually appointed him as her official trunk maker. I mean, if you have an empress or a queen who gives you a kiss on the forehead and says, "This is my favorite guy," you're basically made, you know? It's like if you write a book and Oprah picks you as her Oprah's book club, you're basically made. So this is what happened to Louis, but it's not like he just got to Paris and just everything happened for him. He worked very hard to get that. If you were an empress or one of her ladies in waiting, or, you know, any super rich noble, you clearly had very nice things and you needed them to be packed very nicely. You needed trunks that were very sturdy, very safe, very durable, but you also wanted them to look beautiful, because you wanted whatever was inside to be safe, but you wanted the outside to look just as good. And this is how Louis became the Empress's official trunk maker. And with this title, he was able to gain access to the elites and the upper class and the nobles of Europe. At this point in time, things were only looking up for Louis. I mean, he moved to Paris as a homeless orphan, essentially. I mean, he didn't really move there. He walked there. He Flintstoned himself all the way to Paris, and things were looking up for him. So at some point, after being very successful under Monsieur Maréchal, he decided to open up his own boutique, his own workshop. That went well. And then also in 1854, at the age of 33, Louis Vuitton got married. Now, he got married to a 17-year-old Clémence Émilie Pariot. Under today's standard, a 33-year-old man marrying a 17-year-old girl, yeah, I guess this was 1854, a very different time. I know. So outside of Louis' workshop, there was a sign that said, "Securely packs the most fragile objects, specializing in packing fashions." This does not roll off the tongue, but it was very explicit. Like, listen, this is the best of the best. You have the nicest things. I have the nicest trunks. We're going to get you the best products. That's basically what he was saying with that. Like I said, it does not roll off the tongue, but he was very successful at his new workshop. And I got a quote here saying that his starting sales price in 1854 was $10,565. That must be $10,000 in today's money. I mean, maybe it was $10,000 in 1854 money, but that's a lot of money. Now, Louis had been inspired by a London-based leather fashion house, not like leather fashion, but like leather accessory house called H.J. Cave and Sons. They were making trunks as well, and Louis got some inspiration from them. At the time, it was very common, or I think it was the standard, for trunks to be rounded at the top. The reason that they were rounded is if it rained, because they were going by, horseback, or if the trunk stayed outside and it rained on them, then the rain would just slide off, a bit like a roof of a house, you know, just sort of slides off. It doesn't accumulate. Otherwise, you would get water damage on your silks, on your gowns, on your paperwork, on your documents, whatever you were traveling with. The water would just soak through and just like destroy not only the trunk, but then whatever you had packed inside. So not ideal. However, these rounded top trunks were terrible for stacking. If you had several trunks and you tried to stack one of them on top of the other, they would just fall. So there needed to be somewhere in the middle. So what Louis did is he created this special Trianon canvas. Now, he created a square, flat, rectangle trunk, so it could be stackable, as many as you wanted, as much stuff as you had. But this special Trianon canvas was waterproof, it was durable, it was very hefty, very resistant. So even if it stood out in the rain, in the mud, and whatever, you know, everything could be schmutzy on the outside. Inside, everything looked perfect and clean and pristine. I have to note that from the absolute beginning, Louis Vuitton's work was imitated. We often think of now as Louis Vuitton as one of those brands that's often counterfeit. It's from the get-go, from the very beginning. And like any self-respecting company around this time, Louis Vuitton participated in world's fairs and international expositions, and he went to one in Paris in 1865. This was like the 1865 International Exposition, and this helped him gain more international success and international clients. Like Louis Vuitton is one of those brands that has had international clients almost from the beginning. Like, this is not new for them. Like, we may think of them as opening stores in different continents as something modern. No, it's very on brand. And they actually had their first Japanese customer in 1871. This was Oyama Iwao. He was the Japanese field marshal and one of the founders of the Japanese Imperial Army. He was in Paris at the time. This was during the Franco-Prussian War, and he went to Paris, I guess, to just like observe tensions and policies because he was in the military. And he actually came upon Louis Vuitton, and he was like, I need that. And he was their first Japanese customer in 1871. This success is happening for Louis Vuitton. You know, he moves to Paris, becomes the Empress's trunk maker, gets married, opens up a workshop, etc. Everything goes well. In the background, around this time in the 1860s, 70s, there is the Franco-Prussian War. I will not go into detail because it is so long-winded and complicated, and I don't think I quite understand it. But if you want to do a Wikipedia rabbit hole, the Franco-Prussian War could, you know, occupy your afternoon. Basically, when this happened, Louis' workshop got ransacked. He went into work one day and most of his equipment, like expensive equipment, his crafts, like his raw materials were stolen, windows were smashed, and most of his staff had scattered because it was a war. People were leaving, people were scared. So Louis Vuitton had to rebuild again. You know, we think of success as like a overnight success after 10 years of hard work, but it's more like this. And I think Louis Vuitton is a great example of this. So Louis decides to rebuild. He could have packed up and left with his tail between his legs, but he said, no, I'm going to keep going. So he rebuilt, he reopened his workshop, he rehired employees. Of course, during the war itself, he had a few less clients because there was a war, but he persisted anyway. And in 1872, he introduced this line of monogrammed canvas with red stripe design, which would go on to become a staple and very synonymous with the Louis Vuitton brand. However, as I mentioned, counterfeiting is as old as time itself, and as far as Louis Vuitton is concerned, it has been around from the very beginning. So a lot of his products were being counterfeited or copied and were not the same quality. So to protect himself against duplicates, Louis Vuitton always kept trying to change things up, but you know, unfortunately copycats always kept up with him. So he changed the Trianon design to a beige and brown stripe in 1876 as well. This is also very iconic for the brand and also would be replicated by other people. By this point in time, they had opened up a shop in London on Oxford Street, so things were going very well. He decided to open up a workshop in Asnières. Now, Asnières is in like the northeast of Paris. It's still in Paris, but it's in like a suburb. And so this is where he had his workshop with his workers. There were 20 employees in 1859. By 1900, there were about 100 employees. And by 1914, there were about 225 craftsmen. So these were people whose sole job was to measure, cut, and hand make, you know, Louis Vuitton goods. Mostly trunks by this point, but everything at that point was still handmade. And at some point in time, the Asnières location also became the Louis Vuitton family home. The estate basically had the family home and the workshop on the same grounds, so Louis could wake up and go to work and not be very far away from his family. And currently, the portion of the estate that was the family home is now closed, and it is now a private museum. You can be certain that when next time I go to Paris, I will try to get entry into the private museum, but wish me luck. However, to this day, the Asnières location is still functional. There are still countless craftsmen who work there every single day. Not every single piece of Louis Vuitton is made there today, but there are many pieces that are made there and then shipped worldwide. Louis kept having more success at this point, which was great. However, with tremendous success comes a tremendous amount of copycats. So unfortunately, many people were purchasing imitation Louis Vuitton trunks that were not made with the same canvas, that were not waterproof, and you know, the trunks themselves would disintegrate and the products inside or the goods inside would get damaged. And so Louis was always innovating, always trying to improve things and always trying to evade counterfeiters. So one thing that he created is this special canvas called damier canvas. Now you may not recognize the name, but you will recognize the canvas, the logo itself. And this came out in 1888, and this was directly to try to combat all the counterfeiters. The original canvas is actually trademarked, and if you look at the logo, it actually sells El Vuitton registered trademark, as in like, stop trying to copy me, I see what you're doing. It didn't really work, unfortunately. This canvas also has shellac on it, so it's very durable, but it's also a little bit supple. And as the years went on and as technology improved, their quality got even softer, more for like everyday handbags. But even at this point here, it was still soft and supple, but also shellacked for, you know, protection against weather. And so at this point, Louis's son, his oldest son, actually I think this was his only son. Yes, actually he only had one son named Georges. Georges started working with his father as a young man, and the two of them actually came up with a pick-proof lock. Because imagine if you are a robber and you see a carriage carrying several Louis Vuitton trunks. You know that inside are going to be beautiful, luxurious things like gowns, silk, maybe some money, gold, jewelry. You know that these rich people with these rich trunks have lots of good things inside. So robbers would always pick these locks and, you know, run off with everything inside, which is not ideal. So it was Louis, but Georges too, like the duo, who came up with a special pick-proof lock that they, you know, placed on every Louis Vuitton trunk. So when you would purchase the trunk, not only did you get the quality and craftsmanship, but it was also pick-proof. Georges actually went ahead and put a patent on this lock, and this special type of pick-proof lock is still in use to this day with Louis Vuitton trunks. And the father and son duo were so convinced of their pick-proof lock that they invited Harry Houdini, the master escape artist, magician of the time, to try to escape one of the Louis Vuitton trunks. Unfortunately, Harry Houdini never took up the Louis Vuitton father and son, but how amazing would that have been? Come on, Harry, go back in time, and that would just be marvelous to see him like attempt to spring out of a Louis Vuitton trunk. Now, in 1892, Louis passed away. He was 70 years old. He had had quite a life. He had rebuilt himself multiple times over. It's always sad when someone passes away, but he had lived a full life. And by this point, his son was an adult and had been working with him side by side. So his son, Georges, took over as the second generation Louis Vuitton man. And Georges would help bring the brand to a whole new world and just a bevy of innovations as well. He helped change many aspects of the brand and just helped catapult it to even more of an international level. So just like his father, he went to world expositions. He went to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. And there are actually records of Georges visiting the Americas several times over, because every time he did the transatlantic voyage by boat, he did it through Ellis Island. And so we have all these records of him coming in and out of America several times over. As mentioned, Louis Vuitton has been cursed with counterfeits and fakes from the dawn of Louis Vuitton. And this was not any different for Georges when he took over. So to try to combat this, Georges decided to come out with like the most complicated pattern. He's like, you know what, fine, you're gonna copy us. I'm gonna throw the most complicated pattern I can think of. And this is where the Louis Vuitton or the LV monogram canvas comes from. And so in this monogram here, it's not only like to, you know, try to avoid counterfeiting, but also as an homage to his father who had just passed away, because this monogram here contains several symbols. You have the LV logo, the Louis Vuitton logo, as an homage to his father. You have diamonds, you have flowers, you have quatre fois. So it's a very complex, complicated pattern. And again, it was just to deter people from copying and making direct copies of his products. Unfortunately, as we know, people still found a way to copy and paste Louis Vuitton monograms. And the innovations that Georges did, one of them was actually for this Italian explorer who traveled a lot as an explorer, and he created this trunk bed. So it was a trunk that you would travel with, but inside was a bed you could sleep on. So if you were traveling, you could travel with your bed with you. It almost looks like one of those Murphy beds that's part of the wall, but this one was part of the trunk itself. So you could carry your bed with you. How innovative is that? Georges was a very well-traveled man. He traveled through the US a lot, through Chicago, through New York. He came up with the steamer bag, which was a small bag to be placed inside the larger trunk. This happened in 1901, so it's starting to see the slight evolution of the handbags from Louis Vuitton. But Georges loved to travel internationally, but he also loved to travel locally. Now, this was the turn of the century, so automobiles were coming into play. Georges was a very wealthy man, so he had access to cars, and he loved to travel by automobile. But if you travel by automobile, you need to pack something with you. And he just noticed that he didn't have enough room in his cars. He just found that cars were not meant, or they weren't designed with large trunks in mind for packing, for traveling. They just were not great. So he actually got himself his hands on the framework of a car or automobile. so that he could actually build something for travel. He wanted something sturdy and very space efficient, because if you're traveling by car, maybe you're going longer distances and maybe you need to pack more with you. And at the time, automobiles just didn't have the space to actually place a large trunk in them. So with the framework that he purchased, he actually invented the car trunk. Like, you know, the car trunk, the car boot, he actually invented that because what he did is, with the framework of the automobile, he just took one of his trunks, like the Louis Vuitton trunks, and just placed it in there and just built the frame of the car, or built the car around the trunk. So thank you, Georges, for a car trunk. It's very useful when you go to Costco. By 1913, they had opened the Louis Vuitton building on Les Champs-Élysées, which is an international destination for shopping and for luxury shopping. And the Louis Vuitton building is absolutely no exception to that. So clearly Georges was a businessman, very motivated by business and for keeping the company legacy, but he was also a family man. He had time to get married. In 1863, he married Joséphine Patrel, no word on her age. The two had 5 children, and in order, they had Marie-Louise, Gaston Louis, twin sons, Jean-Pierre, and then last son was Marcel. Now, continuing with patriarchy, of course, the eldest child, Marie-Louise, was skipped over, and her younger brother, Gaston Louis, who was the eldest boy, inherited the family company. In 1936, Georges passed away, so his son, Gaston, the oldest son, took over the head of the company. And he would be the 3rd generation of Louis Vuitton, and he would be the last Louis Vuitton heir, I guess, or person to take over the company. So Georges had worked with his father Louis to learn the ropes. So when Gaston got older, Gaston also started working with his father Georges to learn the ropes, learn the business, because he would be taking over as the oldest boy. One thing that this father and son duo did that I think is amazing is, like many luxury brands, Louis Vuitton does not do a gift with purchase. They don't do samples. Listen, if you want samples and a gift with purchase, this is not the brand for you. But one thing they wanted to do is maybe just do like a little gift of appreciation for their most loyal clients. And so they came up with these monogram trunks, these like miniature trunks, like not a huge one, just like a little one with a monogram Louis Vuitton. It was a real trunk, but just miniature, and it was a flower box. So you couldn't order this, you couldn't buy this, like there was no amount of money you could have that you could purchase one. The father and son would just decide who their favorite clients were, and then one day you would be at your country estate or maybe your palace in the city, and you would get a doorbell, you know, and it would be a worker from Louis Vuitton presenting this miniature trunk with flowers inside as a gift. How luxurious is that? This tradition started around 1910. However, unfortunately, they no longer do this. So I'm told. I mean, maybe Beyonce gets some. Who knows? But if you want to purchase your own monogrammed Louis Vuitton trunk, flower trunk, you can actually purchase them now. You just have to place the flowers in there yourself. Now, one thing that Georges did that I think is phenomenal is he came out with the Louis Vuitton travel guide. So this is literally a travel guide you can purchase. They are beautiful, they're colorful. It's like every rainbow color you can imagine. And these are city guides for different cities across the world. They have like San Francisco, Cape Town, Tokyo, any like destination you can imagine. You can actually purchase a Louis Vuitton travel guide with recommendations, etc. I mean, I cannot think of anything more luxurious than traveling with a little, you know, bright orange or bright red leather-bound travel guide from Louis Vuitton. How luxurious is that? Now, around the 1900s, 1920, 1925 is when Louis Vuitton started to dabble in handbags. They actually had a custom design made for a very special client Miss Coco Chanel. She wanted a personal use, like a personal bag, like a handbag, not a giant trunk, but just like a small leather bag, same quality as Louis Vuitton, but a bag. And so they came out with this dome-shaped bag especially for her. This was one of a kind, custom, bespoke for Miss Coco Chanel. Later on in the 1930s, they would go on to produce this for the general public, for us plebes to buy. This bag has been renamed. It was named the Squire, but then in 1955 it was renamed the Alma bag. So that is the original Miss Coco Chanel Louis Vuitton bag, the Alma. Now in the 1930s, the brand also came out with more bags to be kept inside the large trunks. This was called the travel bag or the keep all bag, which you would literally keep all of your things in place in your trunk, you know, as you're jetting off into your Model T Ford, off to the countryside or whatever. In 1932, it was renamed to the Speedy bag. It's so interesting to know the history of these bags because, again, you may not know the name of every single bag that I'm mentioning, but you've probably definitely seen these and you know what I'm talking about once you see the photo. They also came out with the Noé and Papillon bags, all leather bags around this time. And fun fact, the Noé bag was originally intended to transport champagne bottles. The sole purpose of the Noé bag originally was to transport champagne bottles. Imagine the luxury and opulence where you need a special bag just for champagne bottles. So in 1936, Georges passed away, again, lived a very full, successful life. Gaston took over the brand. Now under Gaston, there was a lot more innovation, a lot of new technologies. They started focusing on smaller leather goods and innovating more supple, soft leather instead of just hard leather that's great for being sturdy and thrown outdoors. They wanted leathers that were very soft and supple, but just as durable, just as resistant. And so they started focusing on handbags, wallets, coin purses, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, while doing research, anytime I do research for a beauty history episode, I always have to research the brand and the Second World War. You know it's coming. Listen, if you get tired of me roasting luxury brands because of their collaborations during the Second World War, imagine how tired I am reading about this. So apparently, allegedly, during the Second World War, Gaston and the Louis Vuitton company collaborated with Nazis, and they also allegedly aided and encouraged the Vichy government and Maréchal Pétain. Annoying? Yeah, definitely. All right, now you know. So moving on to the 60s and 70s, everything was great for the brand. They just kept being more and more successful. Their handbags took off very quickly, very successfully. By 1977, the brand was making revenue of about 14 million. I think it was 14 million in 1977 money. So they did very well for themselves, and they started opening more locations in Asia. So in Japan, they opened locations in Tokyo and Osaka in the 70s. And in the 80s, they started opening more locations across Asia as well, in Taiwan, in South Korea, and also in mainland China. I think that was a little bit later in mainland China. But in 85, this is when they introduced Hippie leather. Again, you may not recognize the name Hippie leather, but you'll recognize the photo. So this is a very soft, very supple leather. It feels nice to wear. It's great for everyday use for a handbag, but it's still very durable, very reliable, and still carries a great name, a great recognition. Now, in 1970, Gaston passed away. Now, Gaston had a daughter, so obviously she did not inherit the company. Her husband did. So when Gaston passed away, his son-in-law took over the brand. Great, isn't that wonderful? Nothing wrong with the son-in-law. I'm just saying patriarchy, you suck. The son-in-law was named Henri Rassamier. So he did very well for the brand. I'm not knocking him as a person. I'm just knocking patriarchy. He, helped the company propel to more international boutiques, more money. Who doesn't want more money? And then in 1987, that is when the LVMH group was founded. This is a multinational corporation that specializes in luxury goods. Now, LVMH, who do they own? Practically everyone. LVMH, the group, underneath like the umbrella, they own Christian Dior, they own Fendi, Givenchy, Marc Jacobs, Stella McCartney, Loewe, Celine, Fenty, go on and on. Like they own, if you think of luxury brands, they're probably owned by the LVMH group. By the 1990s, the LVMH group had about 130 Louis Vuitton boutiques worldwide, and it's in the 90s they started opening locations in mainland China. The first one was at the Palace Hotel, and then later in 1997, this is when they hired the young Marc Jacobs as their first artistic director. This was the first time they had an artistic director, and this around the 90s, this is when we saw a lot of classic luxury houses hiring young up-and-coming talent. We saw this with Steve McQueen. It was very on brand for the 90s, and actually he was the first to introduce the company's first ready-to-wear collections for men and women. Up until then, up until Marc Jacobs, Louis Vuitton had not done ready-to-wear collections yet. And this started the tradition of Louis Vuitton hiring young, fresh talent, like creative visionaries for the brand. In 2018, they hired American designer Virgil Abloh as the artistic director for their men's line. And he was the company's first African-American and also one of a handful of Black creative directors for European fashion lines. Unfortunately, tragically, Virgil passed away in November of 2021. Today, the Louis Vuitton monogram, the Louis Vuitton name, is one of the most recognizable or recognized brands, logos worldwide. I think people on all corners of the world recognize the name Louis Vuitton, understand its significance, its opulence, its luxury, and it's estimated to be worth about $19 billion. So that's not bad for a homeless teenager. He did pretty well for himself. According to records, in 2004, Louis Vuitton counterfeit bags made up about 20% of the counterfeit market in all of the EU. When I think of Louis Vuitton, I think, you know, the luxury, the opulence, etc. But I also think of it as one of the most counterfeited brands, logos worldwide. And it's so interesting that this is not a new phenomenon. They have been copied and faked and counterfeited since the dawn of time. This is something that has plagued and cursed the brand from the very beginning. I just think that's interesting. Unfortunate, but just very interesting. And the Louis Vuitton fakes out there make up a very large percentage of all fake goods out there. So that is interesting. And I think this is it for today's video. Obviously, I could go into more detail about the LVMH group. There's a lot going on, but for the sake of brevity and for not talking for 2 hours, I thought I would keep it a little bit shorter. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of Louis Vuitton. Let me know if you own any Louis Vuitton handbags. Please sound off below. Let us know which bags you own, the leathers, the monograms. I want to know all of it. Make sure you leave a comment. Make sure you leave a like. If you're not subscribed, please take the time to do so. And if you are subscribed, thank you for joining us again. So I think this is all I have for you guys for today. Thank you all so much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time. Bye.